Hello, biology students. Before we get started, make sure that you write down your answer for today's bell ringer as shown on the screen. Our question today is, what is homeostasis? So if you remember, we've used this prefix homeo before, and it means same. The suffix stasis just refers to the state of something. So if we put that together, it just means same state. So if we look at our three options, the best answer for maintaining homeostasis is going to be C, maintaining a constant internal environment of an organism. And today we're going to talk more specifically about how organisms accomplish this, because it is the most important thing that any organism does, because without homeostasis, the organism cannot stay alive. So remember that our whole unit for chapters 8 and 11 are focused on cells. Cells are the basic units of structure and function in living things, and everything that happens inside an organism happens first at a cellular level. So all organisms have to maintain homeostasis in order to stay alive, and this process occurs at the cellular level. There are some organisms that they are only one cell. When we look at bacteria and other prokaryotes, each individual cell is a separate organism. Protists are single-celled eukaryotes, so they have a nucleus and other membrane-bound organelles like mitochondria and Golgi, but their whole organism is a single cell. Examples of these include amoeba, euglena, and paramecium. All three of these can be found in pond water or even living in moist soil. There's also some algae that are single-celled organisms, and some fungus like yeasts. But for the most part, we're going to focus on how multi-celled organisms can maintain homeostasis, because it's a little bit more complicated than simply moving materials across membranes like we talked about in the previous section. So in order to maintain homeostasis, multicellular organisms are going to do the other things that sustain life, like grow, respond to their environment, and then of course transform energy. So homeostasis, like we said in our bell ringer, is just maintaining a relatively constant internal environment. And we say relatively because depending on what your body needs to do at any particular moment, what homeostasis looks like might be different. For example, when you're sleeping, your body temperature actually drops 3 or 4 degrees, and that's perfectly normal. Or if you're in the middle of a hard workout, your body temperature is going to rise 2 or 3 degrees, and that's just your body responding to what is happening to it. But if you are just resting and not doing anything strenuous, and your body can't maintain normal body temperature, or your body has created processes that increase your normal body temperature, call that a fever, then you're not going to feel well because your body is not going to work well. And so oftentimes when organisms can't maintain homeostasis, they're going to undergo physiological stress. And as humans, that's when we feel ill. You're not going to feel 100% when your body is struggling to maintain homeostasis. So remember that every cell of your body has a unique job, and they're going to be specialized to do tasks that help the whole organism stay alive. On the bottom left here, we see liver cells. These liver cells have a nucleus in the middle, and you can see a bunch of these little dots. These are actually lysosomes. And if you remember, lysosomes are the major detoxifying organelle. So they're going to take waste material and they're going to break it down so it can be excreted. That just happens to be the most important job of the liver. And then on the right side here, we have some typical skeletal muscles. So these are the muscles that attach to your bones, and they have nuclei, but they actually have unique organelles inside of them that help them to shorten or contract. And so these cells don't look anything alike because their job is very, very different. This cell specialization is really key in maintaining homeostasis. If the liver cells didn't do their job, toxins would build up in the body. If the muscles didn't do their job, then you wouldn't be able to respond to what is going around the organism. And so every cell, tissue, and organ needs to accomplish its task to help with the overall feat of maintaining homeostasis. Here's some other examples. Red blood cells we can see right here are shaped kind of like donuts, and they really have no organelles. They're just little packets of a protein called hemoglobin that's really good at binding to oxygen. And if we look at other blood cells, like these white blood cells that are stained purple, they have a nucleus and other organelles because their job is to be your immune system, essentially. So even within your blood tissue, you have specialized cells that have different jobs. So all of these cells did come from the one original fertilized egg cell that arose when the egg and sperm from your parents merged. And during the process of development, each cell changed its structure, its shape, and its function in order to create a very large and complex organism. So we're pretty familiar with animal cells. You guys probably learned in health class about how your body works pretty well. But we have to also keep in mind that plants are multicellular organisms, and they too have specialized cell types that each have different structures to accomplish different functions. Some of these are the parenchyma cells that are full of chloroplasts. These are what make up a majority of the surface of the leaf that looks really green. Deeper in the leaf, you might have cells that are make up the vessels that carry nutrients and water throughout the plant, the kind of veins that are actually called xylem and phloem. We also have just regular intermediary cells that actually do more cellular respiration than they do photosynthesis. So there are differentiated cells, tissues, and organs in plants as well. So going back to animals for just a minute, when we have groups of cells that are working together, the next level of organization is called a tissue. This hierarchical organization just means that the levels build on each other. We saw this in ecosystems in our previous unit when we talked about organisms making up species, species make up the community is part of the ecosystem, and so on. This hierarchy at all parts of biology helps to increase efficiency. So the tissue level in animals include muscle tissue, epithelial tissue, nervous tissue, and connective tissue. And so these each four types all look a little bit different and function differently within our body. And you see some examples of each of those tissue types. So when we look at the overall hierarchy, it's not that different in plants as it is in animals. They have cells that make up tissues. Their organs are like their roots, stems, and leaves, and they really only have two organ systems above the ground that we call the shoot system and below ground that we call the root system. And of course, the whole organism then is a combination of all of these parts. So our next level of hierarchy above a tissue is called an organ. This is a group of tissues that work together. A great example is this leaf that is a collection of vascular tissue, ground tissue, dermal tissue. It all is included to form one functional organ. Very similar like what we see in our heart. Most of the heart, this red stuff, is actually muscle tissue, but we can see this white webby stuff. This is actually connective tissue that makes up the heart valves. And there's also nerves that pass through your heart, and the whole thing is covered by an epithelial membrane called the pericardium. So organs are made up of multiple different types of tissues. Then our next level of organization above an organ is going to be an organ system. You're probably familiar with the animal organ systems, things like the cardiovascular system, the nervous system, the digestive system. But keep in mind that plants have systems as well. And their job is to connect organs together to perform a specific function. So here, if we look at the nervous system, the cells that make up the nervous system are called neurons. Those neurons form a network that turn into nervous tissue. The nervous tissue can create organs like nerves, the brain, the spinal cord, and they all connect to form the nervous system. The job of the nervous system, of course, is to gather information from our surroundings, to create responses, and to then carry out those responses. Inside plants, we see a very similar level of organization. They have specialized cells, tissues, and organs, and the root stems and leaves act as the organs. Each species is going to be a little different based on their environment and how they evolved. Just like animals don't all have lungs to breathe air, certain animals like amphibians actually can respire through their skin, or some of them have gills like fish. We have the same organs, but they're just adapted to that specific organism's environment. but most plants do have roots and shoots. Here's some modifications that you might recognize. Some of the plants that we eat are modified roots, like beets. Sugar beets are as well. We also see modified leaves, like the ones of succulents that get really big and they can store lots of water. And you can think about how each of these is really adapted for its overall maintaining of homeostasis. So one other really important factor of maintaining homeostasis is the ability of the cells, tissues, and organs of an organism to communicate with one another. And again, this happens in plants and in animals, where we have molecules that can send messages between cells. The molecule that, or the part of a cell to which the signaling molecule binds is called the receptor. And remember that just because a signal is sent doesn't mean that every cell receives it. Only the cells with the correct receptors can receive that signal. Two specific types of signaling inside plants and animals are endocrine signaling, which is long distance, and then neurological signaling, where we use neurotransmitters and short distance signaling. Here's an example of how a hormone called epinephrine, also known as adrenaline, can affect different parts of the human body. When you have an adrenaline rush or you have an epinephrine released from your adrenal glands, it's going to increase your heart rate and blood pressure, but it's actually going to decrease the activity of your digestive system. Your eyes are going to dilate, so the pupil is going to get larger, but your blood vessels in the kidneys are going to constrict. So we have all of these things happening because even getting the signal triggers different responses in different types of cells. All of these cells only have one job in mind, and that is to keep the organism alive. The last bit that you're going to do after this video is done is to watch the Amoeba Sisters about positive and negative feedback. They do a really great job discussing some examples and giving you some really good information about how positive feedback helps organisms speed up cellular activities because they're encouraging or enhancing a response, and also how negative feedback is the type of feedback we have between cells, tissues, and organs that want to maintain homeostasis. The end result there is to slow down or stop as we get to a set point. So make sure you watch that video to get some good information about positive and negative feedback. After you have watched the Amoeba Sisters, there is a quiz down below. You can do this quiz multiple times if you need to until you get the score that you want. I am available over Remind or email if you have specific questions. Otherwise, I will see you tomorrow.